We did a very brief introduction to jQuery. Let's actually do something useful with it. All right, so I'm just going to blow this away. Okay. One of the things that we want to do is, for instance, listen to this button. Right, when you click on the button, we would like to grab the input fields for the password, the input fields for the input field for the username, right? And actually send it over to a server, perhaps, to create this brand new user who wants to register. Yes? So let's do that. So what we'll do is that first we'll try to grab that button. Okay, let's grab that button, and I want to run something when they click on register. So first, what we can do is we could use, just like we grabbed the H1 before, we could use just the name of the element. But chances are is that we have more than one button. Okay, in this case, we do have just one button, so just grabbing the button would work. Okay, but more commonly, you want to have a unique identifier that says, "Oh, this is the register button," right? So let's call this register, and then maybe btn, right, for button. So on the controller side, we can grab that button, right? We can say var register button, and then we can just grab it. We can say jQuery grab the element in the HTML document whose ID is register button. Right, so how do we say that? So button, if this string here, this string, depending on the syntax that you use in that string, it means different things, right? If it's just like that, it's just the name of the element. If you put a hash in front of it, it means the ID, right? The ID that matches. So in this case, it would be the ID register button. Right? Make sense? Yes. The tag name, the name of the tag. Yeah. Right. Not name equal. Right. Right. There we go. So we have the button, and then once we have the button, we could do things such as associate events to that button. We can say, "Hey, register button." If you have a click, right? If there's a click event, I want you to do certain things. Okay. Now this, just like this, the dot click, just like this with no arguments, right? Actually clicks the button. Right? So you could do some automations where you can. If something happens, then go and click this button over there, right? Or maybe you could do a script that automates users' input, right, as they interact. Or maybe you can record and then play it back. That's not what we want, right? We actually what we want to do is instead run something, execute something when they click. So you can pass here a function. So this is maybe a register handler. Right? So some function that I want you to run. Right? Actually, I want to introduce some really weird syntax. If you haven't done JavaScript before, you can actually put a function right here. Right? And whatever you put in here is this is will execute. It's a function. It's an anonymous function. Right? It's a lambda function. Right? It has no name. Right? It's a throwaway function. Nobody else is going to use this function. Only this click event handler is going to call this. And let's do an alert. Right? We do an alert and say register button clicked. Right? And so if we go back and refresh, we click on the register. Notice that the alert pops up. Right? So it is working. Okay? I feel this syntax is perfectly fine. Right? And in this particular case, perhaps it's appropriate. Right? That no one else is going to use this function. Why even bother creating a brand new function? Okay? It's very popular in JavaScript to do things like this, right? To just use anonymous functions. I think it's very hard to read this nomenclature. I'd rather have a proper function, right? Okay, give it a name, register handler, right? And then pass it as an argument. Make sense? Right? And this does exactly the same thing. Yes?
What do you prefer for us to do on homeworks?
Declare all your functions. Name them. Yep. Also, it makes it easier to read, right? So if somebody's coming here and reading your code, typically you'll declare all your event handlers at the top, right? And then their implementation way at the bottom. Right? So you're not forcing somebody to read through your entire code. So you can very quickly see, oh, these are the 4 event handlers that your controller is handling. If you care to see their implementation, you can scroll all the way down. But if you have it, declared, implemented, you're forcing me to read your entire source code looking for a particular handler, right? So it's better to split them up, right? It's easier on other folks. Yes? No, let's use jQuery. See, that's exactly what .click does. It declares an on-click on the, yeah, it's doing it for you. Yes, yep. Yeah, notice that the HTML portion of this is completely unaware, right, of any code, right? And that's as much as we can divide the roles of these 2 buckets, right, the view and the controller, the better, right? Where the controller is only where you have code, and the on the side of the view is completely oblivious of any logic whatsoever. Okay. All right. So let's see. What else do we want to do? Well, we would want to perhaps grab the input fields, right? The input fields that we have that are this password and the username. So we can do the same thing, right? We can, in the controller, we can grab each one of these, right? So this will be var username field, and we're going to grab it using jQuery. Now, jQuery is it's a very long word to type. It's got 6 letters. One of them is a capital letter. And so us developers, we're very lazy, and so we have an alias for that. We have the $. So instead of typing jQuery, we use instead the alias $, which means exactly the same thing, right? One is a reference to the other, right? So you'll see a lot of $signs in the documentation, right? It just means the jQuery object function, right? So here we're going to grab the $. I think we call the username. Yes? Oh, there we go. Username. We have the username, and perhaps we need all the other fields. Let's grab all the other fields. So it's var password. Field, and this is password, and we'll grab the other one as well. So password 2 and password 2. Yes? All right. So in the registration handler, what we might want to do is grab the values of each one of them. Right. So we could grab the username as a string, and this would be maybe the username field, which we grabbed earlier, and we can grab the value of the input field, whatever they typed, whatever the person actually typed in that input field, and we can grab each one of these, right? So the username, the password field, and the password 2 field, right? So this would be password and password 2. Make sense, right? And we can maybe print it to the console just to make sure that we got the content. So let's do the username string and make sure that we grab all 3. So if we go to console and if we click on register without anything, it just prints out blank, right? Because that's actually what's the value. Notice that it's not null, right? It's a blank, it's an empty space, right? So if here we say Alice. Garbage, and register. Notice that it does retrieve all 3, and we have the data to generate. We have something that we could send to the server to register us, right? Typically, what we like to be able to do is encode that in some format, right? That we can send over. Typically, it will be some user object, right, in the form of a JSON or JavaScript object notation, right, which is it's a common way to represent data, right? So we can say that we'll create an object whose field name has the value, a field name username has the value username string, whose field name password has a password string, right? And maybe we can just spit out the user object. Notice that I haven't done any validation. Right? Typically, I would validate, are these two the same? If they're not the same, maybe I would do an alert, right? And I would not continue until those are the same, perhaps, yes? Or maybe I could display some content as an error message, and we know how to do that, right? We can change content. Yes, we know how to do HTML. HTML allows you to feed content to back to the HTML, right? Yeah, so let's print that out. Let's run this again. There it is. So here's the JSON objects that we would be ready to send to the server. Everybody good? Make sense? All right, so before we continue, let's clean up our code a little bit. This is a little bit of a mess. One of the things that we need to consider is that because the way JavaScript works, when a JavaScript file is loaded, it is immediately executed. So any of these variables are immediately declared. Right? They are part of the single namespace. Right? If for any reason, notice that jQuery, we're loading jQuery, right? And notice that jQuery declared a global variable called jQuery. Maybe it declared a whole bunch of other global variables, yeah, that we don't know about. Okay? Maybe it declared a variable called register button. Unlikely, but it could have. Right? What if jQuery would have declared a variable also called register button? Right? What would have happened here is that because there's only a single namespace, right, I would have trampled on that variable and would have overwritten that variable. You see that? Okay, so that's a very common problem in JavaScript. Right? That has been solved in ES6, but still in older versions of JavaScript, there is no namespacing. Okay, there's only one single namespace. Right? So to get around this problem, because obviously jQuery is not going to be the only library that we use, there's going to be tons of libraries that we load, right? And we don't want to compete over the namespace. Right? So instead, we want to modularize our content so that whatever I generate, whatever code I have, doesn't trample on somebody else's code. Make sense? All right, so let's clean this up a little bit. One of the best practices is to encapsulate this in its own namespace. And the only thing that guarantees a namespace is a function. Right? Notice that the variables declared in this function are only available inside of that function. There's no way for anybody outside of the function to grab those variables. Those are truly local variables, right? And they're not trampling on somebody else's username string. Yes? Right? So we like to do that. Right? So one of the things that we do is that we encapsulate this whole thing in a function. Okay? So now we know that this function here and maybe the init function, whatever, all the variables that are declared in this function are not now trampling on somebody else's variables. Yes? And any functions, we know that, right? So somebody needs to call this. Somebody needs to call this. So it could be that we do something like this. All right? But we just broke our rule. We just declared a function called init. What if somebody else has an init function and we just trampled over that init function? You see that? But how else could we execute it if it doesn't have a name? All right? Well, we already saw that we have a lambda. We have an anonymous function capability, right? So let's do that. Let's instead not even give it a name. But if it doesn't have a name, how do I call it? Right? So JavaScript has the following syntax. Right? As I mentioned earlier, functions are treated as objects. Right? So what we can do here is declare this and say that this is an object. So that thing on the left-hand side of an expression, what do I want to do? I want to invoke it. It's a function. It doesn't have a name. Okay, it doesn't have a name, but call it. Right? So JavaScript is, again, it's not a compile language, it's an interpret language. When it gets to that parentheses, that second set of parentheses, it says, what? Oh, you want me to treat the left-hand side as a function? Right, so it better be a function. It could be a string, it could be something else. If it's anything other than a function, this would not work, right? So it looks at those second set of parentheses. It realizes that the left-hand side is indeed a function. And now I can invoke it. It invokes it. And now it behaves just the way we had it before. Right? It invokes the function, and it grabs the buttons, and it generates a click event, and it handles the registration, and it works just like before. Make sense? But now it's encapsulated. Right? This pattern, this design pattern, is a very, very common design pattern. Well, at least before ES6. Okay, it's still widely used out there. You'll see it quite a bit. When you see this syntax, don't be intimidated. It's called the immediately invoked function expression, right? So immediately invoked function expression, or IFE. Okay, it's very, very common. This is how we used to do modules before ES6. Right? That's how we would encapsulate code. Right? ES6 removed all that, being able to create classes and exports and namespaces, which we'll take a look at that when we do React next week. Okay? But again, this is still widely used today, so I wanted to point it out to you. All right, let's see. We registered this. This should still work the same. Yes. Yep.
We were not calling it, like you were just writing register button or click and you do the function.
Yep.
But we were not calling it.
Yeah, we were not calling it, right. Click was calling it.
Okay, right.
Yeah, we were passing it as an argument.
Yeah. So this is like just it will call itself.
Right, because we have the parentheses on the left, right, it's the argument, right, and on the right-hand side says, okay, use that argument, treat it as a function, right, and invoke it immediately. Yep, yep. All right, excellent. So we have an object. We can now start looking at maybe passing it over to a server, right, to do something with this brand new user, right? We'd like to insert it in some database or something or other. Yes? Let's do that. Let's take a look at that.